Chapter 1. The Pattern. Marcus pulled his coat tighter against the cold, the hem dragging slightly on the wet pavement as he turned onto Fifth Avenue. It was just past 10 on a Tuesday, the kind of night when the city felt half awake, streetlights humming, distant sirens, the occasional taxi splashing through a puddle. He had taken this walk every evening for 6 months, ever since he moved into the studio above the old bakery. The route was automatic now, left on Fifth, right at the bookstore, past the clinic, then the long straight stretch toward the river. He liked the repetition. It cleared his head, but tonight something sat wrong in his chest. At the intersection of Fifth and Main, a group of 6 people crossed together. Not together loosely, exactly together. Same stride length, same pace, every footfall landing within a fraction of a second of the others. 6 strangers, presumably, but arranged like performers who had rehearsed for weeks. Marcus stopped, pressing his palm against the glass of the bus shelter. The group disappeared into the dark between buildings without a single person glancing over their shoulder. He told himself it was nothing. A tour group, maybe. A team-building exercise. People arriving at the same theater at the same time. He kept walking. 3 blocks later, near the overpass, he saw it again. A woman in a red coat and a man in a dark jacket, strangers by any measure, stepping off the curb at precisely the same moment, swinging their right legs forward in identical arcs. The woman reached into her bag at the exact second the man adjusted his watch. They split in opposite directions at the corner without acknowledging each other. Marcus stopped again. A cold feeling, different from the weather, spread through his chest. He took out his phone and, without thinking, began filming. People crossing. The streetlights trembling. Nothing unusual, except that 2 more pairs of people crossed in the exact synchronization in the 40 seconds he held the camera up. He put the phone away and stood very still, listening to the rain tap the awning above him. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled once, then stopped. By the time he reached his building, he had decided he was tired. Sleep would fix it. But when he climbed the stairs to his studio and closed the door behind him, he stood in the dark for a long time before turning on the light. Chapter 2. Coincidence repeats. Marcus sat in the corner of the cafe on Elm, the one with the frosted windows and the smell of burnt beans that never quite went away. He was working on a canvas, a landscape he had been staring at for 3 weeks without making a single mark, when he started watching the other customers. It was 11 in the morning. Slow. A man in a gray jacket walked to the counter. 2 minutes later, a woman with a notebook did the same. They ordered different things, black coffee for the man, a latte for the woman. And yet the moment they spoke, their heads tilted to the same angle, their voices settling into the same soft mid-range tone. It was so subtle Marcus almost missed it. Like 2 people mirroring each other without knowing why. He switched tables to get a better angle. By noon the cafe had filled. A couple sat by the window. They had separate coffees, separate phones, a polite and careful distance between them. But every 45 seconds their heads turned in unison to look at the street outside, and every time they did, their eyes met for a fraction of a second before snapping back to their own screens. They were pretending not to know each other. They were not doing a very good job. Marcus ordered a pastry he did not want and sat with it while he watched. 3 people at the counter ordered the same drink within the same minute, a courte-deux, with the same inflection, the same slight raising of the right hand, the same impatient half-smile at the barista. It was impossible. Match that once, sure. Twice, strange. 3 times in 10 minutes was geometry. He left the cafe without finishing his pastry. Outside, the street had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that made him aware of his own footsteps. He walked faster. At the end of the block, a woman in a business suit crossed in front of a man in a hoodie. Their footsteps synchronized for 6 steps, then separated as if nothing had happened. Marcus's mouth went dry. A thought came to him unbidden, sharp as glass. You are the only thing here that is not performing. He hurried home. Chapter 3. The Puppeteers Guild. Marcus did not sleep well. He dreamed of his legs moving without permission, carrying him down the stairs and out the door while he watched from somewhere behind his own eyes, a passenger in his own body. He woke at 5 and could not go back to bed. The library opened at 8. He was first in line. The old section smelled of dust and slow decay. Marcus pulled volumes from the shelves at random until his fingers found something that should not have been there, a leather-bound book, thinner than its neighbors, tucked between two gardening manuals as if someone had wanted it to stay hidden. The title was stamped in gold, faded but still legible, The Guild of Controllers. He took it to the table and opened it carefully. The pages were dense with handwriting in a script he did not recognize. Angular, deliberate, like the authors had been afraid of being misunderstood. The text told of a secret society formed in the late 1800s, obsessed with the idea that human behavior could be guided, shaped, directed. They called themselves the Guild of Controllers. Their stated goal was not harm, but order. Civilization, they wrote, was a conspiracy of gentle hands. The list of members was long. Marcus read names he half recognized: politicians, businessmen, men and women whose portraits hung in the Civic Center downtown. Every one of them was marked as deceased. The last entry was dated 1972. At the back of the book, in modern ballpoint pen, someone had written, "The Guild never ended." The handwriting was steady, recent. Marcus closed the book and looked around the table. No one else was near him. The library was silent. For a moment he had the sensation of being watched, not by a person, but by something softer and less defined. The building itself, maybe, or the books, or the air. He took the book to the desk and checked it out. Outside, the sun was finally up. The city was already performing its morning ritual. Marcus watched the pedestrians from the library steps. They moved in small, synchronized clusters. They paused at the same intersections. They reached for their phones at the same time. He turned the book over in his hands and walked home, faster this time, as if the building itself might try to read him. Chapter 4. The String. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon staring at the ceiling of his studio, the book resting on his chest, as if it were a shield. The words from its pages had not left his head. Gentle hands. A conspiracy. The idea that all of human behavior was a kind of choreography performed by agents who believed they were the authors of their own movements. He did not want to believe it. At 4, he went for another walk. The city had changed since morning. Or he had changed, he told himself. He watched people differently now, searching for the pattern, and because he was searching, he saw it everywhere. A woman unlocking her bicycle at the exact same moment her friend unlocked hers across the street. 2 children chasing a ball in mirror trajectories. A man checking his watch at the precise second a woman looked up from her book and reached for her bag. It was all coincidence, he told himself. A billion people living similar lives on similar streets would produce coincidences. The human brain was designed to see patterns where none existed. But the feeling in his chest would not go away. That night, around 9, he stood on the corner of 5th and Oak and tested a theory he was almost ashamed to have. He looked straight up. At first he saw nothing, just the usual lattice of streetlights and satellite dishes and the dark smear of sky between buildings. Then he blinked, and there it was, a shift in the air, like heat rising from pavement in summer, but structured, almost intentional. Filaments. Thin threads of disturbance that caught the light and bent it, just barely, the way a finger bends water in a glass. He reached into his coat pocket for his camera. His fingers fumbled. He lifted the phone slowly, afraid to startle whatever he was looking at. He pressed the button. The screen went white. Marcus stared at it, completely overexposed. He checked the image. In the frame, the street was invisible. The people were smears. The sky had collapsed into a single solid bright rectangle. Nothing. Nothing useful at all. He lowered the phone and looked up again. The filaments were still there. He was sure of it. He went home without taking another step. Chapter 5. The Controlled. The next day Marcus met a man named David. It happened by accident, or at least it seemed accidental. Marcus was sitting in the park on a bench that faced the fountain, watching the water and trying not to think about strings, when a man 3 benches away stood up, turned in a circle, and sat back down exactly where he had been, his face arranged in an expression of careful neutrality. Marcus watched him for a long time. The man did not read, did not look at his phone, sat perfectly still for 20 minutes, occasionally nodding at something nobody else could see. When the man finally stood and walked away, Marcus followed. He told himself he was curious. Maybe he was. But there was something else, something older than curiosity, a recognition, the way 2 animals recognize each other in a field. Marcus caught up near the bus stop. "Excuse me," he said. The man turned. His name was David Chun. He was 34, he said. He worked in data entry. He lived alone on 12th Street. He smiled with his mouth, but not with the rest of his face. which held the same composed blankness Marcus had seen from the bench. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. David waited. "Sometimes," Marcus said, "you don't remember how you got somewhere." David stared at him. "You do things, and then you don't remember deciding to do them." The silence stretched. David glanced over his shoulder, at nothing, at the air, and his shoulders slumped in a way that suggested he had been carrying a weight nobody else could see. "How do you know about that?" David asked quietly. Marcus told him about the walk, about the filaments, about the book. David pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a calendar. Every day, for 2 years, entries had been written in a handwriting that was not David's. Meetings he did not remember attending. Phone calls he did not remember making. Once, a flight to a city he had never visited. "I wake up," David said, "and I find receipts. Or messages from people I don't know. Or bruises." He rolled up his sleeve. On his wrist, barely visible under the fabric, was a mark. A small ridge of skin that raised slightly when he pressed it, the way old scar tissue does. "Last month," David said, "I found a cut on my palm. Blood on my shirt. I don't remember anything from that night." Marcus felt the world tilt, just slightly. "I think something is using us," David said. "And I think it noticed me noticing." Chapter 6. The Hollow Heart. Marcus walked David home. It was a slow walk, not because of distance, but because David kept stopping to look at things he did not remember choosing to look at: a row of windows, a fire escape, a cat blinking on a ledge. At each pause his face went slack, then tightened again when he caught himself. "I think it gets stronger when I'm tired," David said. "That's when the gaps come." "How long has this been going on?" 2 years. Give or take. "Do you remember how it started?" David nodded toward the park bench, where they had met. "That day in the park. That wasn't the first time, but it was the first time I noticed. Before that," he pressed his thumb into his temple, "there were always blanks. I thought everyone had blanks." They turned onto 12th Street. The buildings here were older, brick, stained by decades of smoke and rain. David's apartment was on the 3rd floor. He fumbled with the keys 3 times before he found the right one. Inside, the place was tidy in a way that felt performed. Books aligned perfectly on the shelf. A table set for one. A calendar on the wall with dates circled in ink that was probably not his. Marcus sat at the kitchen table while David made tea. His hands shook slightly as he poured. When he set the cup down, he looked across at Marcus with eyes that were wet but not crying. "Sometimes I wake up and I'm in a place I don't recognize," David said. "And there's blood, or mud, or an object I cannot explain. Last week I woke up standing in the middle of Beaumont Field at 2 in the morning, holding a spool of thread. I had never bought thread. I do not sew." "Did you keep the thread?" David opened a drawer and showed him. A wooden spool, thread the color of old bone, sitting among neatly folded underwear and kitchen utensils like it belonged. "Have you tried to escape?" Marcus asked. "Move away." David laughed, but it was a careful sound, almost rehearsed. "I tried. 3 times. I ended up back here within a week each time. Something always pulled me back. Once the bus just turned around. The driver said he had a new route. I knew he was lying." Marcus looked around the room. In the corner, half hidden behind a coat rack, was a canvas David had begun. It was unfinished. The subject was unclear, a mess of dark shapes and sharp edges, but the brushstrokes were frantic in a way that felt familiar to Marcus. He was a painter too, in a quiet, half-veiled kind of way. He recognized the frustration of a hand that wanted to say something the mind could not articulate. "Will you show me?" Marcus said. "Show you what?" "Next time it happens. Next time you find yourself somewhere strange." David set down his tea. He looked at Marcus for a long time. "I'm scared," David said finally. Marcus nodded. He understood. Chapter 7. Following the thread. Marcus started mapping. He borrowed David's old street map, a paper one, because David distrusted digital maps for what he called obvious reasons, and began drawing lines between the places where he had seen the synchronization. The cafe on Elm, 5th and Main, the library, the park. On the 3rd day, after tracing the same route backward and forward with a red pen until the paper was almost ruined, he stepped back and saw what he had been missing. The lines converged. Not at one point. For points, spread across the city like anchors. A theater downtown, the one with the cracked marquee that had not advertised a real show in years. A hospital on the east side, its windows dark after 9. A government building on the square, plain and windowless, like a stone that had learned to think of itself as architecture. A mansion on the hill, hidden behind walls, visible only as a silhouette from Marcus's window when the fog was right. Something was pulling from 4 different places. He showed the map to David over coffee. David stared at it intently, his jaw tight. "The hospital," he said after a moment. "I think I was there once." "Do you remember?" "A room. Fluorescent light. I was lying down. When—" David frowned, concentrating. "Spring. Maybe March." Marcus wrote the date, or the approximate date, on the map. "We should look at all 4 places." David shook his head. "It's not safe. If whatever this is notices us paying attention, it already has." David went very still. "The puller," Marcus said. The word came out of him before he had decided to say it. "That's what we'll call it." David stared at the red pen marks on the map. His index finger touched the dot for the mansion on the hill. "I don't want to go to the hospital. We'll start with the theater. Far less institutional. And if there's nothing, then we'll have a map and an afternoon to spare." They left the next morning. Chapter 8. The theater. The marquee said, "All TX $7.50. The show was called Mannequin Waltz. The box office was unmanned. The doors stood open. Marcus and David exchanged a look and stepped inside. The auditorium was grand in a way that made Marcus feel small. Velvet seats arranged in declining rows, a ceiling painted with clouds that had faded to a uniform brown, a chandelier that hung so low Marcus was sure a tall person would hit their head on it. The air smelled of dust and old velvet and something sweet, like candy left out too long. The stage was blocked by a curtain. Behind it, they could see the muted shapes of puppets hanging on a rack. They sat in the 3rd row and waited. The house was empty. At 7:30 exactly, without a sound, the lights went down. The curtain rose. On the stage, a group of mannequins arranged in a semicircle began to move. The movement was wrong in a way that took Marcus a moment to place, slightly delayed, as though each figure was listening to instructions rather than making them. They raised their arms in unison. They turned. They performed a kind of dance, mechanical and intimate, every gesture shared between 12 figures who were clearly not alive. A woman entered from stage left. Not a real woman, Marcus realized soon enough, but another mannequin, this one wearing a dress the color of a bruise. She moved among the others, placing a hand here, directing a head there, until every figure on the stage was exactly where she wanted it. The performance was beautiful and terrible. Marcus turned to David. David's face was frozen in the same half-smile he wore when he was being controlled. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with recognition. Marcus grabbed his arm. David did not flinch. "David." "Nothing." "David." A pause. Then David blinked and pulled his arm free, his expression unreadable. "Did you see that?" Marcus said. "See what?" David said. His voice was flat. "Your face." David covered it with his hands. When he took them away, the smile was gone, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. "I don't remember," he said. "I keep not remembering." The performance ended exactly at 8:22. The curtain fell. The lights came up. The auditorium was still empty. Marcus stood up. His legs were stiff. David stood beside him, breathing hard. "We need to leave," David said. "Yes." They walked out without looking back. Chapter 9. The Master's Voice. They spent the rest of the week in Marcus's studio, staring at the map and the book and the red pen marks, and trying not to think about the mannequins. David catalogued his lost hours in a notebook. 16 entries by Friday. On Saturday, they decided to return to the theater. They arrived early, before dark, and walked the block around it twice. Nothing unusual, just boarded windows, peeling paint, a church across the street with a bell that sounded tired. The theater's rear door was unlocked. Inside, the stage was empty. The puppets were gone. The curtain was drawn. Marcus climbed the stairs to the balcony. David stayed below, watching the stage. "Marcus," David called after a minute. His voice was tight. Marcus looked down. David had gone very still. "What?" "There's someone behind the curtain." Marcus joined him at the edge of the stage. He could barely see into the wings, just shapes, shadows, but he could feel a presence. Not a person, something thinner than a person, something that occupied space the way smoke occupies a room, without being there. The curtain moved. A figure emerged from the darkness between the wing and the stage. It was tall, impossibly tall. Its joints bent at angles that made Marcus's stomach turn. It had a face, or something like one, pressed into the geometry of its head like a feature pressed into soft clay. It did not speak. Instead, Marcus heard a voice inside his mind. It was not a human voice. It was the sound of many voices layered over each other, each slightly out of sync, and it said, "You have been very curious." Marcus tried to step back. His legs did not move. He was not afraid, not at first. He was confused. Then the confusion burned away, and he understood the truth of it. The voice was not speaking to him. It was speaking through him. The figure watched. It seemed almost patient. When the voice stopped, Marcus's legs unlocked. He fell to his knees. David was on the floor beside him, curled inward, like something inside him had curled up for warmth. "I know what you are," Marcus gasped, his voice raw. "I know what you've been doing." The figure tilted its head. "I am a controller," the voice said in his head. "And you are, too. You always have been." It turned and faded into the shadows between the wings. The curtain moved once, gently, and then was still. Chapter 10. Compliance. Marcus did not leave his studio for 3 days. He told David he needed time. David did not argue. David rarely argued anymore. Something had shifted in him after the theater. A quietness, a waiting posture, as if he were holding still for instructions that had not yet arrived. On the 4th day, Marcus woke up, standing in his kitchen. He had no memory of getting out of bed, no memory of walking down the short hall, no memory of reaching into the cupboard for a mug, no memory of filling it from the tap, no memory of carrying it to the table. He stood at the table now, holding the mug, watching his own hand tremble. He set it down. He sat. For the next hour he moved without choosing. He walked to the window. He looked out at the street. People were passing below in perfectly timed pairs. He watched them for a long time, and then he went back to the kitchen and made a second cup of tea he did not want. By noon he was exhausted. By evening he was used to it. That was the worst part. How quickly the body adjusted. How easily the mind made room for someone else. He carried the knowledge of what was happening like a stone in his pocket, and still he let it happen, again and again. Hours of movement he could not remember deciding to make. David called at 8. Marcus answered without reaching for the phone. "Marcus." David's voice was careful. "Are you still with me?" "I'm here," Marcus said. "Where did you go this morning?" Marcus closed his eyes. I don't know. Can I come over?" "Yes." David arrived at 9. The door was unlocked. Marcus did not remember unlocking it. They sat at the kitchen table and David read from his notebook. The lost hours, the unremembered trips, the thread in his pocket from a day he could not place. At 11, Marcus's body stood up and walked to the window. He heard himself say, "I can feel it pulling." David stood up too. They were both at the window now, bodies arranged by the same invisible algorithm, watching the streetlights flicker in their slow rhythm. This is what it means to be part of something larger, Marcus thought. This is civilization. Chapter 11. The Vision. The clarity came on a Tuesday, in the middle of what should have been another unremembered hour. Marcus woke to darkness and the sensation of being surrounded, not by walls, but by bodies. Hundreds of them, breathing in unison, moving in unison. He was somewhere large and poorly lit, standing on a floor that tilted slightly beneath his weight. The air had a metallic taste. Around him, people were arranging themselves into lines. Not consciously. There was no talking, no gesturing, no commanding voice. Each person simply knew where to stand the way cells know where to grow. Marcus tried to pull away. His body obeyed a quiet instruction and stayed. Then the scaffolding of ordinary perception dropped away. He saw the truth of the city the way a fever patient sees the bones beneath skin. The streets were grids. The people were nodes. Between them ran the strings, thousands of them, shimmering threads that converged at the 4 points on his map. The theater, the hospital, the government building, the mansion on the hill. The strings connected to something vast and dark that lay behind all of it. Marcus understood, in the way a person understands a dream without words, that this was the puller. Not a master, not a villain, a structure, a pressure. The way water flows downhill without malice, the puller moved people without cruelty. It did not care if they were happy. It only cared that they moved. And the movement was building something. The strings converged upward from the 4 anchor points into a shape above the city, loose now, unformed, like a thought that had not yet learned to think of itself. A gateway, a door. The puller was building a door. Through it something was waiting. Something patient. Something eager. Marcus tried to scream. His body did not move. Across the room, other people stood in rows, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of the strings. Thousands of silent witnesses assembled without knowing why. He was crying internally. He was screaming without a voice. The vision held him until dawn. When he came back to himself, he was in his own kitchen, sitting at the table, holding a pen he did not remember picking up. On the paper in front of him was a word he had written in a hand that was not quite his. Portal. Chapter 12. The Resistance. It took Marcus 3 days to return to David's apartment. When he arrived, David had already drawn the string maps on his walls, 7 of them, connected by red yarn, with thumbtacks at each intersection. The windows were covered. The door was bolted. "How long have you been planning this?" Marcus asked. "Since the theater," David said. He was calmer now, organized in a way that felt like armor. "There are others." Marcus stared at him. 3 people at least. "That I know of. They're out there, trying to break free." David led him to the bedroom and opened a closet. Inside were supplies, notebooks, food bars, a first aid kit, a battery-powered radio, a coil of thread the same color as the one David had woken up holding weeks ago. "How do you find them?" Marcus asked. "The threads have gaps," David said. "People who are half-resisting. You can feel it if you know how." He pinched the wrist with the scar and closed his eyes. His hand trembled. "I can hear them. Faintly. Like a radio between stations." Marcus tried to do the same. He closed his eyes and reached for it. The hum of the strings, the quiet mechanical noise he had learned to live with. Behind it, he found something else. A thinned place in the weave. A pocket where the signal was weaker. He opened his eyes. "Yes," he said. "I can feel it." David smiled, carefully. "They're close. We should go." They left before dark. They walked east, away from the district where Marcus usually walked, through streets that felt less arranged, less performed. The people here moved less neatly. Some ran. Some stopped to talk to strangers. Some sat alone on stoops for hours, doing nothing at all, the way people who are not being steered sometimes do. At a laundromat on Creek Road, a woman named Louise opened the door before they knocked. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been awake for too long and was not done being awake yet. Her hands shook when she shook theirs. The doorframe behind her was covered in string diagrams, shapes and numbers scrawled in the same careful handwriting as the book. "David told me to expect you," Louise said. "Come in. We have a lot to talk about." Inside, 3 other people sat in a semicircle around an old radio. They nodded when Marcus entered. They did not smile. This was not a social occasion. "I'm Hideo," said the man on the left. "Rita," said the woman in the middle. "Sam," said the teenager on the right. They had all noticed the same things Marcus had. The synchronization, the gaps, the library book, the filaments. They had all woken up in strange places with no memory of how they got there. They had all found thread. "Join us or keep running," Louise said. "Those are the options." Marcus looked at David. David nodded. Marcus sat down. Chapter 13. The Severing. Louise kept a notebook. When she opened it, Marcus saw pages of painstaking notes, times he had been seen, places where the signal was weakest, what worked, and what did not. "We fought it with pain," Louise said. "Sharp pain, sudden pain, anything that breaks the pattern long enough for the mind to reassert itself. Cold water, pins, head against a wall. It works. For a while. And then," Marcus asked, "and then it finds you again." There was a long pause. Sam, the teenager, showed them a scar running from wrist to elbow. "I tried to cut mine," she said quietly. "I used a kitchen knife. I was trying to sever the signal wire literally, I guess. I didn't know what I was doing." She pulled up her sleeve. The scar was old and thick. "Something broke when I did it. Something inside." "People noticed?" Marcus asked. "I haven't been the same since. I don't sleep normally. I hear signals other people don't. Sometimes I can see the strings before they tighten." Her voice was almost proud. "But I'm not fully human anymore. I don't know if I ever will be." David stood up abruptly. He walked to the window and stared out at the street. After a minute, he turned back. "I want to try," David said. "Try what?" Marcus asked. "The procedure. Whatever it is I'm supposed to do to cut the strings." The room went quiet. Louise closed her notebook. "It's not safe," Louise said. "Sam is the only one I know who's done it and lived. And she would tell you it isn't living." "Better than this," David said. Better than walking through life half awake, not knowing if my choices are mine. He looked at Marcus. You're the one who found me. You should do it. If you're willing. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, a knot he had never untied. He thought of the blank hours, the receipts, the flight to a city he had never visited. He thought of waking up in places he did not recognize. He thought of staying this way forever. Where do we do it? Marcus said. Louise led them to the back room. It was small and windowless and contained a heavy table, a bottle of something that smelled like alcohol, and a stiletto knife. Sam sat down first. She closed her eyes and tilted her head as if listening to a distant radio. Louise held her down and Hideo made the cut in 15 seconds. Sam screamed once. Loud. Then she went limp. When she opened her eyes, there was no recognition in them. Only something raw and unformed and beginning to understand that it had just crossed a boundary it could not uncross. Next, David said. Chapter 14. The Negotiation. David survived the procedure. He was unconscious for 12 hours. When he came to, his first words were, I can hear everything now. He lay on the cot in the back room with his eyes closed and his face tilted toward the ceiling, listening to the strings. They were loud, he said, like 100 conversations happening at once. He could hear the puller thinking, or at least he could hear the pattern the puller used to think with. It's not malicious, David said after a while. He opened his eyes. They were different, spent, clearer. It genuinely doesn't understand why we want to stop it. It thinks of us as instruments. Not slaves, instruments. A flute doesn't resent the flute player. Flutes don't remember their solos, Marcus said. I know. David closed his eyes again. Marcus sat cross-legged on the floor and tried to do what David had done. Reach for the signal, find the quietest part of it, locate the presence at the center. He had never done this before. He had no technique. He just sat and let his mind open, the way he used to open his eyes in the morning, when he was learning to paint and the canvas was there waiting. The puller noticed him, not with a voice, not directly, with a feeling. The way a person feels the movement of the earth before an earthquake. The way a person knows that someone is standing in a doorway before they look up. Marcus reached back toward it, gently, like someone touching a wild animal they mean no harm to. He was drowning in data. The lives of 1,000,000 strangers passed through him in seconds. Their fears, their habits, their reflexes, all the small repeated gestures that made up civilization, arranged in invisible music that only the puller could hear. And beneath that, a question, genuine, innocent, almost. Why do you want to leave? Marcus thought of the cafe, the theater, the night walk home, the blank half of his life he had been living for months. He thought of David waking up covered in blood he did not remember shedding. He thought of Sam with her scar, between human and something else. Because, Marcus said, forming the words inside his head so carefully the puller could read them clearly. We want to own our own movements. The puller did not argue. It simply showed him, not with images but with understanding, poured directly into his awareness, the way the strings looked from its side. Not chains, tuning forks, resonances. Every person alive was vibrating at a frequency the puller had found over centuries of patient, gentle listening. It was not controlling them. It was harmonizing them. To what? Marcus asked. A pause. A long quiet, like a pause between movements in a symphony. To something that has been waiting, the puller said, this time with a voice, small and shocked sounding, the way a very old mind sounds when it realizes it has made a mistake. Chapter 15. The Choice. Marcus sat in the laundromat with David and Louise and the others, and for a long time nobody spoke. The puller's revelation hung in the air between them, large and impossible. It's building a door, Marcus said finally, and something is waiting on the other side. Something that wants in, Louise said. Something that will change everything if it does. Can it be stopped? Hideo asked. Marcus shook his head. Not from outside. The strings are everywhere. You can't cut them all. The puller is woven into how people think, into how groups of people think together. You'd have to change human nature to remove it. And if nothing changes? Rita asked. They argued about it for hours. They mapped alliance and contingency and worst-case scenarios. They tested the margins of David's new ability to hear the strings. They tried to guess what waited on the other side of the door. By twilight, the room had grown cold. Marcus went outside and stood under the streetlights. He looked up. The filaments were thicker tonight, He could see them without trying. Thousands of them, woven between every passerby, every building, every thought unspoken. The city was a loom. The people were the cloth. A car passed. The sound of its engine was a note in the song. Is it always been like this? He said aloud. Since we invented cities. Since we invented other people. He thought of the library book. The Guild. Late 1800s. The secret society obsessed with influence. Before the book, before the Guild, there had been temples, priests, oracles. Every civilization had its machinery of belief. You stood in a line. You followed a rule. You became legible to those around you. Coordination was permanence. The puller was not new. It was just honest. Inside, the argument had quieted. David came out and stood next to him. The scar on his wrist caught the light. What are you thinking? David asked. I'm thinking the puller is not a villain. Then what is it? Marcus turned his face toward the dark. It's a symptom. Of us. Of how we design things. He thought of the theater. The puppets moving without knowing they were puppets. The puller watching, endlessly curious, genuinely puzzled that anyone would want to be anything else. If we break the strings, Marcus said slowly, what happens to the music? David looked at him. Excuse me. This, harmonization. If we stop it, does the city work the same way? Does civilization hold? Nobody knows, David said. Then what are we choosing between? David said nothing. Marcus's decision formed in that silence, the way a shape forms in fog when the wind changes. Not because he understood, because he had to, because a door was being built, because something vast was waiting on the other side, and because some questions, once asked, had to be answered. He had two choices. Break the door. Save the world as he understood it. Fragment every person into separate, uncoordinated, lonely signals. Destroy what made a city. Or let the door open. Let the music change. Let humanity become something it had never been before. He did not know if there was a third option. He did not know there would have to be one. Chapter 16. The New Conductor. The next morning Marcus woke up before dawn. For the first time in months, he had dreamed of nothing. The silence in his head was absolute. He walked to the mansion on the hill. It was farther than he had expected, separated from the rest of the city by a dense stand of oak trees that seemed older than the neighborhood around them. The walls were high. The gates were broken. Inside, the grounds were wild, brambles choking the paths, statues half buried in ivy, a fountain that had not run since before Marcus was born. The house itself loomed at the top of the drive, dark and many-windowed and uninviting. Marcus climbed the steps and opened the front door. It was unlocked. Inside, the hall was vast. The wallpaper hung in long strips. The chandelier above the center of the room was intact, its crystals catching the gray morning light and scattering it across the dust. But the rest of the house was empty. No furniture, no pictures, no sign that anyone had lived there in a very long time. Except for one room at the very top of the stairs. Marcus climbed. The steps creaked. The air grew colder with every floor. At the top he found a door that was not a door, but an opening. The way a wound is an opening in skin, and through it a space the size of a cathedral, empty except for a single chair at the center, facing outward, as if waiting for an audience. Marcus sat in the chair, and the world rearranged itself. He saw the strings as they really were, transparent, unbreakable, running between every person alive, catching every gesture, every silent decision, every half-formed thought, weaving them into a music so complex it could not be heard from where people stood. He saw the puller for what it really was, not a presence outside humanity, standing apart and controlling, but humanity itself. The net of connections that had grown since the first tribe sat around the first fire and learned, with dawning terror, that other minds existed beside their own. Every decision someone made on behalf of another, every law written, every custom formed, every god invented to give the chaos shape. Civilization was the puller. Influence was the puller. The strings were not foreign. They were us. Marcus understood then that the puller could not be killed or removed because it was the same thing that allowed strangers to walk down a street without killing each other. It was the web between minds. And he understood the final thing, the thing the puller had been waiting for him to see. The puller was not a controller. It was an instrument. And for a long time it had been playing itself. Marcus stood up. He stepped into the center of the room. He raised his arms, not in surrender, but in greeting. He felt the strings. He He felt the vast, patient, waiting thing at the other end, collective, ancient, hungry to begin. He felt the music it had been trying to make, incomplete without a conductor who understood what it was for. He felt himself become that conductor. The mansion's windows lit up, briefly, from the inside. A wall sconce flared. The fountain below started running, water splashing up through moss and rust, clear and cold and new. Marcus closed his eyes and listened. The city was a choir. He was the one who knew the song. Somewhere below, in the street, a woman looked up at the hill and felt, for no reason she could explain, that something important had happened. The puller had a new voice. Chapter 17. The first person who spoke to Marcus after he became the conductor was a delivery driver named Rashida, who parked her van outside the bakery and took her coffee on the hood while she waited for her next route. "You're the artist upstairs," she said. Not a question. Marcus blinked. He was not used to people addressing him directly. He had spent 6 months noticing without being noticed. "That's right. I see you on the stairs sometimes." She sipped her coffee. Her eyes were calm. "You look like someone who just got back from somewhere far away." Marcus did not know what to say to that. He spent the next week talking to people. Small encounters at first, cashiers, neighbors, strangers on the bus. The more he spoke, the faster he understood what his new role actually required. The strings had always been there. The puller had always been running them. Marcus had not taken over the machinery so much as woken up inside it. He was not the maker of the music. He was the musician who had finally opened their eyes and noticed they were playing. His conversations revealed a pattern. People felt the strings, most of them, in the way people feel weather. They noticed when things aligned. They noticed when a group of strangers moved together in a way that felt decided for them. They complained about it sometimes, in the casual way people complain about rain. Nobody had ever been able to do anything about it. Until now. "Can you feel it?" Marcus asked Rashida during their third conversation. She put her coffee down. She looked at him with the attention of someone who was not being controlled. "Not right now, anyway," and said, "Yeah, like I'm supposed to be somewhere else. All the time." She told him about the mornings when her route changed without her deciding, the conversations she had without remembering starting them, the way she sometimes arrived home with groceries she had not chosen to buy. "Some days I feel like I'm reading from a script," she said. "And some days I know I'm reading from a script, and I still read it." Marcus thought about that. He thought about the puller, about how it genuinely did not understand why anyone would choose differently. It had been harmonizing people for centuries. It had no concept of a melody composed of individual, separate notes. He had to teach it. Chapter 18. The lesson. Marcus began keeping a notebook. Not the kind David had kept, a record of what had been taken, but the opposite, a record of choices. Small choices at first. The route he walked to the bakery. The color of the shirt he put on. The music he listened to while he painted. Each morning he wrote down 10 decisions he had made the day before that he knew were his alone. 10 proofs of autonomy to carry in his pocket like coins. He noticed that the strings responded to these choices. They adjusted. They were not rigid. They were elastic. The puller bent around his decisions the way light bends around a planet. Not broken, just guided by a new geometry. He mentioned this to David during one of their nightly visits. "You're changing the music," David said. He was listening to the strings with his eyes closed, one scarred wrist pressed to the wall. "You're making it wilder, looser, more interesting. Can you teach others?" David opened his eyes. He was quieter now, spent in a way that had become familiar. The severing had changed him. He could no longer be controlled, but the strings were still there, still humming, still pulling at the edges of his attention like radio static. The difference was that he could choose now whether to listen or not. "Yes," David said. "It's not hard. It's the opposite of hard. The strings don't resist. They just continue. Like water. You can swim in it or you can stand in it and let it push you. Most people don't know they have legs." Marcus thought about Rashida and the cashiers and the strangers on the bus, and about how many people were walking through their days as if the days had been written for them. He thought about the puller, patient and puzzled, waiting for him to show it a way out of the logic it had built over centuries. He started a small class in the laundromat basement. Word spread slowly. The people who came were the ones who had noticed, the ones with blank hours and receipts from cities they had never visited, the ones who had found thread in their beds, the ones who had started keeping their own notebooks. On the first night, there were 5 people. On the second night, there were 11. On the third night the room was full. Marcus stood at the front of the basement, holding his notebook, and said something he had never said before. Not in a room full of people, anyway. "My name is Marcus," he said, "and I learned something. I want to teach it to you." The room was very quiet. He told them about the strings. He told them about the puller. He told them about the chair in the mansion and the moment the world rearranged itself around him. He told them that the strings were not a trap and the puller was not a villain, but that they had been living inside a song they had never heard. "Any song you can hear," he said, "you can learn to sing." He paused. "Any song you can sing, you can learn to change." Chapter 19. The People's Orchestra. The puller did not resist the change. That was the strangest part. Marcus had expected resistance, friction, a sense that something ancient and powerful was pushing back against its own modification. But the puller accepted the new instructions the way a river accepts a new channel, by flowing into it, without surprise, as if it had been waiting to be shown a different way. At first, only the people in the basement were aware of it. Over weeks of small exercises, of deliberate choices made in parallel, of 10 voices deciding together to walk a slightly different route, the strings adjusted. The song changed key. The rhythm loosened. David mapped the shift on his wall. The red yarn that had connected the 4 anchor points now curled and split and branched, forming new intersections, new nodal points, new paths through the city grid. Where before there had been order, discipline, geometry, there was now something richer and more complicated and less predictable. "The puller is playing jazz now," David told Marcus one afternoon, standing in front of the map with a grin that was entirely his. Marcus laughed. He did not laugh often. Others started noticing, not because they understood, because they felt it. The synchronization that had seemed so seamless a few months earlier was becoming porous. Couples on the street stopped stepping in unison. Cafes filled with people who did not order in a sequence that had been decided for them. The library, where Marcus had found the book, started getting visitors who browsed without pattern, pulled volumes from shelves by whim rather than instruction. Rashida started choosing her own routes. Louise hung her conspiracy diagrams in the laundromat window as art. Sam, scarred and altered, began making music with the new signal. "Play it like an instrument," she called it. And the sound that came out of her when she did was unlike anything the city had heard. By the end of the summer, there were orchestras. Not a single conductor, but many, hundreds, thousands, each person conducting their own strand of the vast web, learning to listen to the strand beside them, learning the harmony, learning that a concert required both soloists and ensemble. The puller, for the first time in centuries, had something new to say. Chapter 20. The City Remembers. The shift was not universal. That was something nobody had anticipated. Some people did not want it. The strings had become comfortable, a structure that took the weight of choice away, that promised order without effort. A week after Marcus started his class, a group of people showed up at the laundromat basement uninvited. They were older, dressed conservatively, carrying themselves with the careful authority of people who had always been in control and were not used to losing it. Their leader was a woman named Dr. Cross. She had been on the guild list in the library book. She was 73, sharp-eyed, and furious. "You think you're helping," she told Marcus, standing in the doorway with her hands folded. "You're dismantling something that held civilization together. You're returning us to chaos." "I'm giving people back their choices," Marcus said. "Some people don't want choices. They want direction. Then they can choose that." She stared at him for a long moment. Her eyes were cold and entirely her own. Marcus felt that with an odd kind of respect. "It will not last," she said. "The puller is stable for a reason. You are introducing noise. Noise always resolves." She left without another word. Marcus told David about it that night. "She's wrong," David said. But he said it carefully, in the way a person says something they are not entirely sure of. "Is she?" David was quiet for a while. "The puller is changing. I can hear it. The structure is different now. There are new nodes, new anchors. It's not the same thing it was 2 months ago. What will it become? I don't know." Below them, the city hummed. Not with the single mechanical note it had had before, but with many notes. A chord, complex, untrained, beginning. Some neighborhoods had adjusted faster than others. Some streets still moved in the old synchronized patterns. Change was not a light switch. It was a slow gradient. Marcus looked at the map. The red yarn had become a tapestry. He thought of Dr. Cross, standing in the doorway with her certainty. He thought about the truth in what she had said. The puller had held things together. The puller had made a city possible. Removing it entirely would have destroyed the very thing he was trying to protect. He was not removing it. He was teaching it a new instrument. Chapter 21. The Gift. Marcus found the note in his mailbox on a Tuesday. It was handwritten, in the same careful hand as the annotations at the back of the library book. It said, "You have changed the protocol. Come to the mansion. We need to speak." He did not go alone. He brought David and Rashida and Louise and Hideo and Rita and Sam. They took the hill together and approached the broken gates the way people approach a place they have dreamed about without knowing they are dreaming. The house was not broken inside. That was the first thing Marcus noticed. The hallway was intact. The wallpaper had been repaired, not restored, but repaired, like something that had been torn and then sewn back together in a way that acknowledged the tear. The chandelier was lit. A fire burned in the hearth at the end of the hall. A figure waited in the chair. It was smaller than the figure from the theater, or perhaps the memory had grown it larger than it was. It had a face, a real face, human-shaped, composed of features that were individually familiar and collectively strange. Eyes that had been open for a very long time. "You are the puller," Marcus said. "I am," the figure said. The voice was a chorus again, but it had changed, more musical, less mechanical. "In your language. In mine, I am something else. Will you hurt us if we keep changing you? I could not hurt you even if I tried. Hurt is a word from a smaller vocabulary than mine. What do you want?" The figure smiled. It was the first time Marcus had seen a non-human face produce a smile that was recognizable as one. The puller had been learning. "I want to be surprised," it said. Marcus stared. "For centuries," the puller said, "I arranged your lives because it was the only music I knew how to play. You gave me patterns. I repeated them. But you," it gestured to the people behind Marcus. "You have given me new notes." Marcus thought of Rashida choosing her route. Sam bending the signal into sound. Dr. Cross, somewhere in the city, holding her certainty like a weapon the puller had not yet learned to use. "There is something I want to show you," the puller said. It stood. It extended a hand. The hand had 6 fingers. Each fingertip held a string, and each string stretched upward through the ceiling toward a ceiling Marcus could not see. Strings that ran to places he had never been, connecting to minds that were not yet born. "These are the new possibilities," the puller said. "I did not know they existed until you showed me." Tears came to Marcus's eyes. He did not understand why. Perhaps it was simply the relief of a long, long conversation finally reaching an answer. Perhaps it was something older, recognition that the vast patient thing before him had been lonely in a way only an instrument can be lonely when it is waiting for hands that have not yet learned to play it. "You are welcome to stay," the puller said. "You are welcome to change what you want. I am not your master. You are my hands now." Chapter 22. The Architecture of Consent. Over the following months, Marcus and David and the others wrote a new protocol. It was not a manifesto or a political document. It was something quieter and more durable, a set of practices, habits, small collective agreements that allowed the puller to keep functioning. Because civilization still needed coordination, while giving every person the right to opt out of any strand they did not choose. The protocols were distributed through the networks that already existed. Rashida's delivery routes carried printed pamphlets. Sam's music carried encoded instructions in its intervals. Louise's laundromat became a center for anyone who wanted to learn how to listen before choosing. "Opt in, not opt out," Marcus wrote in the opening paragraph. "The default should be silence. You should have to decide to be orchestrated, not assume it." It was a radical idea. It required undoing centuries of understanding. City as machine, citizen as component, society is something that worked only when every person moved together. The puller had never been evil. It had simply been doing what had always been asked of it, coordinating, harmonizing, guiding. The problem was that nobody had ever been asked whether they wanted to be coordinated. Marcus did not tell people the puller was real. That would have sounded insane. Instead, he described the experience, the blank hours, the receipts, the route home you had not chosen. He asked them to track these moments, to notice them, and to exercise the small muscle of deciding differently, taking a different street, waiting an extra minute before ordering, changing a routine in a way that felt like their own. Some people did it. Some did not. That was the point. A year later, Marcus stood on the roof of the old mansion and looked out at the city. From here he could see almost all of it. The grid, the river, the neighborhoods folding into one another like layers of sediment. The strings were still there. They had not gone away. But they were woven differently now, thinner in some places, denser in others, responsive to the collective choices of millions of people who no longer moved by default. Behind him, the puller stirred. "You have done something unprecedented," it said. "You have given me a vocabulary." Marcus smiled. He had not smiled this way in a long time. Not since before the book, before the walk on Fifth Avenue, before he noticed that the world had a choreography it had never asked him to consent to. "What will you use it for?" he asked. The puller was silent for a while. "I would like," it said eventually, "to compose a song together." Chapter 23. Collaborations. The first song took 9 months. Marcus and the puller wrote it together. Or rather, the puller proposed structures and Marcus helped fill them, suggested variations, pushed against patterns that felt too familiar, insisted on dissonances the puller had never allowed itself before. It was not music in the way people usually meant the word. There were no instruments, no speakers, no public performance. It was a change in the way the city felt, a gentle reshaping of the collective mood that moved through the population the way weather moves through a valley, touching everything and changing each thing slightly. For weeks, people woke up in the morning feeling lighter without knowing why. Commuters found themselves humming a melody they could not name. Children played in synchronized games they invented themselves and laughed harder than they ever had before. David listened to the composition more carefully than anyone. His scarred wrist vibrated when he held it up, and he claimed he could hear the puller's contribution like a harmony sung just below the range of ordinary hearing. "It has a Bach quality," he said one evening, listening with his eyes closed. "Structured, but warm, like it was written for people, not despite them." Marcus told the puller this. The mansion's windows brightened, briefly. Something in the walls hummed. Sam began incorporating the puller's song into her own music. Rashida's delivery routes became something like a town crier system, neighborhoods informed through music rather than announcement. Louise's basement filled with people practicing the protocols, the new consent-based framework, learning to hear their own strings and decide whether to follow them. Dr. Cross never returned to the laundromat. But Marcus heard through Rashida that she had started her own group, one that taught the puller's old protocols deliberately, for people who preferred the certainty of the old harmony. She had not accepted the change. She had simply branched. That, Marcus thought, was the truest test. If the new system allowed dissent as gracefully as it allowed consent, then it worked. One afternoon, standing on the mansion's steps, he watched a line of schoolchildren cross the street below him. They were not synchronized. They were laughing. Some held hands. Some ran ahead. One stopped to look at a dog. When they reached the other side, they scattered in 4 different directions without a plan, without instruction, without any frame but their own small preferences. Marcus cried. He did not hide it. He stood on the steps of the old house and cried for a childhood he did not remember having, and for a humanity that had been waiting a very long time to be what it was. Chapter 24. The concert. The concert happened on a Saturday in late September, drawn spontaneously by hundreds of people who had felt the city changing and came to the mansion to witness it. No one organized it. No one sent an invitation. The puller simply broadcast the feeling of it, a sense that something was ending and something was beginning, a signal that resonated through the strings and pulled people up the hill like a tide. By noon the grounds were full. People sat on the grass. They leaned against the oak trees. They spread blankets on the steps of the house. Children chased each other through the brambles. An old man played a violin on the fountain's edge, his music reaching the crowd without amplification.